party started because it's 1 o'clock sharp, and
Okay.
you guys are very busy. So let's roll. Welcome to the smartest people in the room. We are so glad you are here with us, and just by showing up, you are already demonstrating your very own smarts. Today, we continue our celebration of Women's History Month by featuring two women who are the literal definition of what my focal point for this series is. Wickedly smart, accomplished, respected, and oh, by the way, two of the nicest ladies I know in the whole industry. After today's session, I bet you will agree with me. Before I get started, let me take care of some business. First, to the audience, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat window. The reason we do these webinars is twofold. First, we want to showcase really smart people and the amazing work they do day to day in the music industry. But the second reason is a bit more nuanced. Most of you know that I am a music industry headhunter. I place music executives in roles throughout the industry. So by definition and function, I help people connect with companies. In this series, my goal is to help you make more connections, and I invite you to take full advantage of that opportunity. Specifically, I invite you to engage with the speakers and the other attendees in the chat of the Zoom. Please introduce yourselves, share your LinkedIn profile, say hello to your friends, and make some new ones. And ask questions of our speakers. We will try to address as many of those as possible during the interview. Also, please make sure your chat is set to address speakers and attendees. I want to thank our sponsors, for without their support, we could not keep this free. I want to thank First Horizon Bank, Bufkin Baker, Four Roses Bourbon, Fairlane Hotel, the Tennessee Entertainment Commission, Lightning 100, Tennessee Brew Works, Moo TV, Jive Printing, Project Music, and Cushmaster's brand of CBD products. So let's get down to business. In today's host seat, we welcome back my good friend and smartest people alumnus, Susan Genco. Susan is the co-president of the Azoff Company, working alongside industry veteran Irving Azoff. Her responsibilities include oversight and management of a diverse portfolio of entertainment companies, along with the company's strategic and legislative efforts. The Azoff Company portfolio includes Full Stop Management, Global Music Rights, Iconic Artist Group, and Oakview Group, among others. Susan's a lecturer at the law school at UCLA, where she has taught music law since 2012, and in addition is a founder of the Music Industry Clinic at UCLA School of Law. She was proud to be selected for Billboard Magazine's Power 100 and featured in Billboard Magazine's Women in Music, the 100 Most Powerful Executives, as one of the Executives of the Year. Prior to joining the Azoff Company, Susan held a variety of executive positions, including EVP at Global Music Rights, Head of Business Affairs and Music for Guitar Hero, a division of Activision Blizzard, SVP of Business Affairs at Warner Brothers Records, SVP of Business Affairs and Operations at Capital EMI, and VP of Business and Legal Affairs at Arista, under the tutelage of Clive Davis. Susan received a JD from Harvard Law School and a BA summa cum laude Phi Beta Kappa in economics from Wellesley College, where her studies included 1 year at the London School of Economics. She serves on the KCRW Foundation Board and Music Artists Coalition Board and the Executive Committee of the Entertainment Law Initiative of the Recording Academy. Welcome back, Susan. Such a pleasure to see you.
Oh my gosh, thanks, Tom.
And joining Susan as today's featured guest is Benta Brown. She is head of operations and strategy for Keep Cool, RCA, and founder of Oma Lily Projects, an artist management and production company. Most recently, she led Chance the Rapper's recorded music and publishing operation as a member of his management team. Binta has also executive produced several projects, including Friend Goals by Tank and the Bangas for Verve UMG, and produced feature-length documentary Fly Like a Girl, and is co-producer of the new Mandela musical. Binta manages Grammy Award-winning producer and artist Peter Cottontail and several other emerging artists. Prior to her career in music, Binta was a highly regarded international corporate lawyer and human rights advocate. She sits on multiple boards, including the American Theater Wing, Chicago Shakespeare Theater, and the Merit School of Music, and is co-chairman and co-founder of the Black Music Action Coalition. Billboard magazine recognized her on each of its 2020 hip hop and R&B power player and women in music executives lists, and on its inaugural 2021 change agent list. Please welcome these two amazing rock stars to the smartest people in the room. Take it away, ladies.
I don't, Binta, I feel like we should just hang out.
I think we should.
Like,
Good with me.
we got nowhere to go but down after that introduction.
I hope we don't disappoint everybody.
I'm a little worried. You know what? That's a female reaction, right? That is a female reaction. So, Tom, thank you for having us. Thank you for that introduction. My introduction of Binta is she's the reason I'm here, the reason I showered, the reason Tom suckered me into doing this again. He got me on once before with one of my heroes, Burtis Downs, who manages REM. And one of the reasons I got into the business. And now with Binta, one of the reasons I'm excited about being in the business. I think it's a really exciting time for a lot of reasons. And I want to get into that with you, Binta. But first, I want to start with you have, as we just heard a little bit through Tom, one of the most varied and interesting backgrounds, right? We got a lot of folks in the music business who just been doing one thing, but you're like Ivy League to top tier partner, top tier law firm, and now to rap, like Ivy League to rap. So can you just give us just tell us a little bit about your journey and how that all makes sense?
How does that happen? Or some people might say, especially in my extended family, how did that happen? Yeah, so, I grew up loving music. Music is my first language. And it's actually even stranger than you realize because, along the way, I spent a semester in conservatory at Manhattan School of Music.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And I'm classically trained on piano and trombone. And yeah, so how does a classically trained Ivy League educated person end up working in hip hop? I'm not sure that it's that strange. I think there actually are a handful of us who are in hip hop and rap. But in my case, I grew up loving music. It's my first language. It's my last language. It is the language of movement and possibility. I always thought that there was, and I continue to believe that there's this amazingly close intersection between the law, which can compel us to include one another and to not discriminate against one another and to uplift the dignity and the humanity of all people, and music and the humanities, which, it works. It's the opposite side of the coin. Like it comes from within. You realize when you're standing, like when I think about all of my friends in this business, and when I think about friends whom I used to meet, I used to go to music festivals when I was a partner at in big global law firm, and I would tell my partners actually that it was client development because it was maybe not necessarily for the firm, but it was definitely client development. But I would go to these festivals by myself, usually with nothing more than a backpack, and I was always so impressed by how I could be standing, at any music festival, and surrounded by people who different background, different educational background, different, socioeconomic class, different races. And then a sound would come on, whether it was, Bon Iver or Arcade Fire, like pick your band. And everybody would be moving and grooving to the same beat. And we found humanity in that. And so for me, music has always been just a part of my core. And for the human rights work and for the advocacy work that has always been near and dear to me, like, for as long as I can remember, for as long as I could speak, actually, music is part of that. And so I never had any doubt. I grew up playing 11 different instruments. Every time I picked up a different instrument, I, got the hang of it, relatively quickly. I come from an extremely musical family. My maternal grandmother and grandfather, they entertained the troops during World War II through the USO. My grandfather was a DJ known as Billy Blue Note down in Texas. And on my father's side, one of my uncles was a well-known jazz musician and gospel musician who should have a lot of copyrights, but doesn't. And we'll talk about that in terms of artist advocacy in a little bit. But so music was always part of who I am. In terms of rap, it's actually surprising to me that rap is the genre I'm most affiliated and associated with right now. It wasn't, that part wasn't a plan. Did I plan to end up in music? Yeah. When I went to Cravath, I 150,000% knew I was choosing Cravath because we represented Universal and Time Warner and a whole bunch of different media companies. And what I wanted was to make sure that I had the knowledge from the top. I was also really inspired by Clive Davis because, he's
my first boss.
Yeah, Harvard educated lawyer who didn't go and work for a music law firm when he started. And so to me, I looked at his career and I looked at a handful of other dudes' careers. And I thought, well, this is the path they followed in order to become music executives. So this path makes sense to me too. But the rap part though, I grew up loving, I was a weird kid, on the one hand, I would have my Sony Walkman because I'm that old. And, I'd be listening to Tchaikovsky or Debussy or whatever, preparing. And I'd have my cousins all around me in Texas and New Orleans, sometimes making fun of me, sometimes teasing me because they knew that I was trying to pretend like I was listening to hip hop. But in fact, I was not listening to it. But then as soon as I would pop off my headphones, my grandmother's house filled with sounds with EPMD and Rakim and, a lot of those old school rappers. And, I found currency when I started at Barnard because I had hip hop literacy, with Tribe Called Quest and, De La Soul and a bunch of those bands who I really dug and discovered, with the roots. And it made me cooler. It was the first time in my life I started becoming cool because I knew the music. So
I think you were probably cool before college.
but what I love about hip hop and the reason why I gravitated towards it is because when you think about innovative business models, the innovative business models come out of the hip hop community. When you're talking about independence and trying to, and that's a function of survival. The other thing that I love about hip hop is that it is the language of revolution. So I love rock. I love Southern rock. I love rock and roll. I love the blues. To me, that's also the language of revolution. There's not a lot of, or rather, there's a lot of similarity in my heart and my mind between rock and hip hop. And so, getting into the industry and looking at different business models and wanting to do things in a different way, it was the rappers and hip hop heads and, folks from the dance community, who've consistently innovated and expanded on the model. And so that's where I wanted to be. And it helped that I love the music. And it helped that I love the people too. Some of these folks have become some of my nearest and dearest friends. One of their fathers called me the other day and fussed at me because I didn't tell him about I didn't tell him about this appearance either, but I didn't tell him about a national TV appearance I had a couple weeks ago. He was like, "How could you not tell us that? Aren't you family?" And I'm like, "Yes, but I forgot." He's like, "How do you forget things like that?" And I'm like, "Because I'm busy." So
love that. Well,
I think that, hopefully that articulates a little bit of the journey, but sometimes I'm surprised. Sometimes I wake up and, there was a moment a couple of years ago where I remember calling my mom on the way home from the studio and saying, "Mom, this is so confusing to me. I'm used to people who are wearing, who go into the office and they're talking about the thread counts of their handmade suits and are pretending to impress everybody with their knowledge and, talking about big deals. And by big deals, I mean, not just $1 billion, but tens of billions of dollar type deals." And I said, and now, sometimes I come out of the studio and that's not what the studio conversation is, at all, at all. And it was funny because she actually said to me, she's like, "Maybe you need to get a couple more friends closer to your age."
Oh, well, there's so much in there. I think it's a beautiful time right now where genres used to be much more divisive, right? Like if you liked a genre, kind of what you're saying, like you didn't like another genre. Now I think there's this, there's this great ability where people love music across genres. But you've changed my thinking. I'm now going to think about music less in terms of like the genres and the labels that radio puts on it or we put on it, but more like, okay, the music of revolution, the music of escapism, the music of love, right? And they're like, those are really the themes and categories. And it's less about these genres we've all defined. Well, let me hit that. And there's so much that you said that I want to, okay. Being a person of color as a classically trained musician, I just saw there was a video New York Times op-ed where Chris Bowers was, did you see this piece?
I haven't seen it yet, but I know Chris.
Okay, so everybody should see it. I thought it's this beautiful piece that the Ava DuVernay did about, and it's Chris, and it's his journey as a Black man doing classical music, and he's talking that through and drawing parallels to his grandfather's experience. It's really, I'll try and find the link and put it, it's a great piece, but tell me about that experience. And did you feel like, what does it feel like to be a classically trained Black musician?
So, it's interesting. If I were Nina Simone, I would have had a bad experience. I would have had the Nina Simone experience, right? She was a classically trained pianist, and then she ended up not being a classical musician at all because people wouldn't accept her for that.
Right.
I don't know that I was always aware as a kid, and this is in part because of the way I was raised, but I don't know that I was always aware of the bias I was facing and the bias in my education. And like I said, a lot of that is because the way my parents raised us. I have two siblings, and they protected us a lot. They protected us more from racism than I didn't realize the extent to which they were protecting us against racism until I was already practicing law and I had a couple of experiences, and they were like, yeah, we live in a racist world. I was not prepared for that part of it, to be honest. I mean, I was and I wasn't, because they raised us to really believe in ourselves and to be very fully confident. Excuse me, because that was the tool we would need to have in order to be successful in life, according to my parents. Is faith, love, and confidence, knowing who you are and believing in yourself. So, and then there's another element, which is that I grew up in a period in the United States where it was before the backlash that happened in the 90s. And it was, after a lot of progress had been made. And so there were some places, many places, and I grew up in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. So I grew up in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. with a father who was frequently in the media. He's a Washington Post columnist and media commentator. And so I was protected and shielded in a different way too. And so like in terms of my training on a day-to-day basis, I didn't really experience, I was also really, really good. Like I was the one in high school who was teaching and coaching and tutoring and mentoring my classmates on their instruments and helping them to understand how to become better at their instruments. So there are all of these different things that on a day-to-day basis were actually very helpful to me.
Mm-hmm.
When I was at Interlochen in Levine School of Music, I got in because because I was good, like they didn't, actually don't know. Actually, I think that for Interlochen, I had to send in an audition tape. And so they didn't know what my race was when I was getting placed and admitted. And I think the same thing was true for Levine on piano. Mm-hmm. Or maybe actually no, because I remember I'll never forget this audition. Because I remember auditioning from this guy who had come for my teacher who had come down from Juilliard. And I just remember nailing it. Like, I just remember nailing that particular audition. And of course, he was one of those classic, quasi-abusive teachers. So that was a different issue.
Oh, Whiplash. Did you see Whiplash?
Whiplash. Yeah, he was, I had a lot of teachers like that in music. Like too many, actually. But yeah, so but then there were little things, and when I look back now, I realize, oh, that was actually pretty racist. I just didn't appreciate it as being that when I was growing up, because I grew up in this sort of like happy, idealistic environment, you know. But now I realize, you know,
That's
that
do you think that's a good thing or a bad? Like, do you feel like you were unprepared then when you found the real world and faced those issues?
I think that it was better for me actually, in a way, because it didn't, because I didn't grow up hating people who aren't black, you know, and because I grew up expecting the best out of everybody I was around,
Wow.
um, and 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 I didn't go into situations automatically assuming or presuming that people were going to be racist towards me. And I think that that's important. Like, I think it's actually a strength to believe that people want to see the best in one another. But I also think that it's really important to understand when you are experiencing real racism, because, and maybe this is a female trait, and maybe this is a Binta trait, I don't know. Maybe it's a combination of both, but I'm the kind of person who has a tendency to internalize external criticism. And when the criticism is rooted in racism, it's more pernicious, and it can really control, and it can really debilitate you. And I've definitely had that experience in my life, in my adult life, and recently, actually, you know, not recently as in last week, but recently as in over the last few years. And so, you know, you know, like, I can look back now and I realize, like, oh, when that teacher said to me, you know, you're too smart, you know, to pursue, you know, or when a teacher would say to me, you're interested in too many different things, you know, that as opposed to finding ways to nourish all of those interests and bring it together, that there was that was a loaded statement. Or when there was a teacher who would say to me, oh, you know, you might be too smart to actually be a classical or an orchestral musician. You know, the orchestral musicians I know are some of the smartest people I know. And so it was like he was saying, you're too smart as a black person to do this. Like, you know, like, smart black people aren't necessarily. So, like, there are things that I've replayed in my mind where I'm like, oh, these were, but, you know, I had these amazing, and have, well, my father's passed away, but, you know, grew up with amazing parents who never allowed me to sit in that or to feel badly about it, for it to affect my self-esteem. So,
Love
you know,
that.
I think being like just ignorant enough was actually really helpful, because otherwise you do walk around with a chip and you kind of start looking at everybody and assuming the worst. And
Right.
it's like the path to becoming really bitter when you think everybody and everything is racist,
Right.
is a short path, or it can be a really short path.
Yeah, I mean, clearly it worked. Look at how accomplished you are. But I'm struck by, because we all know your accomplishments, right? But how positive you are. And you've been like, I keep hearing your self-reflection, both on the way you were raised, but also on the education you got from your music teachers. So now, as you, as a senior person of color and woman in this industry, how do you then think about mentoring and fostering excellence on the folks who are coming up, you know, the younger people coming up now?
I mean, I've always, even when I was a sophomore in college, mentoring and helping others is in my DNA. It's just how we were raised. My grandmother, both my grandparents on both sides, always had the door open for young people to come through. They were always serving the community. My father was the same way in his career. My mother was a public school teacher for 35 years. You know, it's just, it's in my DNA to be helpful. You know, like, I believe fundamentally in doing whatever we can to help others achieve, you know, what I believe is God-given potential and capacity. I think one of the biggest wastes in our society is when there's anything that would delimit somebody's potential or their capacity, right? So to find ways to help people, and to unleash that capacity, it's good for them, for their individual dignity, their individual humanity, but it's also a net good and a net positive for society as well. Because if you have everybody who's operating, who feels dignity in their work and who feels respected, and you have everybody who's operating at maximum, you know, that's how we get to this idea of utopia. So, I posted the other day one of my artists on my management roster. So I still manage in addition to Keep Cool, which I know is not shocking to you, Susan, because everybody you're surrounded by is is on the management side and or on the label side, sometimes at the same time. So one of my managed artists, we just put out his very, very, very first release.
Who's that? Who is it?
His name, so this is difficult. He goes by Rich, which we discussed this and we said, this is going to be hard in search, but that's what he wanted to do. And I am here to support him. He did a beautiful cover of Frank Ocean's Chanel and also an original song, Stay With It. He wanted to be able to give proceeds from his merchandise to a handful of charities he selected. So the idea of philanthropy, so the post that I made was philanthropy, which is it's literally the love of humanity when it translates from the Greek. It has to be part of everything we do. And to me, mentoring is also another way of expressing that profound love of humanity. So if in setting up your businesses or setting up BMAX, setting up Keep Cool, whatever I'm doing, if we're not always figuring out ways to bring other people into it, to guide them, to provide them with relationships and connections, to be that little tugboat on the side that's helping them to see where they need to go, then I think that we're making a mistake. And, I used to see this a lot in the legal profession. I was always surprised at the big law firms by the extent to which, we didn't necessarily invest in mentoring, particularly because it's supposed to be an apprenticeship model. The music business is really similar. We have to, and particularly given the complexity of what we do and how it's just growing in complexity, if we're not guiding the young managers who are coming up behind us or the young artists
and lawyers and artists.
People are just making it up. And this becomes a mess, as you know. This becomes a mess very, very quickly when people are making it up.
Yeah.
When people don't know what they're doing.
Get there. You know what I'm so impressed by? And this is like when I talked about, it's not Ivy League to rap, like that's such a weird juxtaposition. It is just
it is kind of weird.
Well, I mean, there are lots of other folks too, right? But it shouldn't be weird.
Yeah.
Right? But it's the juxtaposition where you talk about like being at a law firm and going to a show, because this is what I'm so impressed is the two sides of Binta. And I think why you're so successful, a lot of folks have one side that works and the other side, right? But and you think about lawyers sometimes being divisive, and here you are at one of the top law firms going to shows, thinking about bringing the community together. And here you are talking about mentoring. And a lot of times, and I think particularly for women, they tend to lean into that selfless side, mentoring, giving back, maternal, right? But you also have this great confidence and you're not afraid of also, right? Like you're pulling other people up, but not at the expense of taking care of your own business and taking care of yourself. And I think that's what's so incredibly impressive about you.
Pulling people up is good for business. I mean, but
it doesn't happen, right?
And it's weird. Like we have this weird notion of, we engage in zero sum, brass knuckle competition way too much in this industry and actually in every industry. Right. Where either I'm winning, if I'm winning, or it's I want to win, which means that nobody else can win. But right. We have the ability to collaborate, to engage in a dance with one another, where we're creating net benefits. And so I want to share. I mean, I don't want to share my marketing plans with anybody. I'm not going to share release schedules with folks ahead of time. But I want to share as much knowledge with people as I possibly can, because it makes our industry better and it invites more people into, I don't think that we actually have a problem inviting people into the music business, because what we do is cool. But we have a problem, I think, sometimes inviting people who can embrace a core set of values that would enable our industry to be much better, much more comfortable, much more inclusive, and that will, that services artists and fans much better, and ultimately what I really care about is, how are we servicing all of our fans, all of the consumers of music? And in order to do that well, we have to service the artist. And so mentoring and guiding people, like, to me, I continue to be surprised by people who don't want to make time to do it.
And why do you think that is, Binta? Like, why, right? The Annenberg study just came out. I don't know if you agree with it, that we haven't made much progress, right, in terms of female voices, both in the artistic community, in the studio, in the C-suite. We haven't made progress. And why do you think that is? And what can we do about it?
I think that it's oftentimes a really toxic environment for women. I think that when you have to worry about what the socializing aspect is going to be, and what somebody's true intentions are when they're asking you for a meeting, and given alcohol and drugs that are sometimes a part of meetings and celebrations and studio life and getting together and touring and live, I think that it can be a really difficult environment for women.
Yeah. How do we fix it, right? Like, particularly when, in theory, and we know it hasn't always worked, right? There's lots of histories, but when you work for a company, in theory, there is a place to go if you are a female independent contractor, songwriter, musician, session musician, singer, and you're in a studio environment. You don't have an employer. You don't have and again, I know the chain of command, right? I know it doesn't always work, but sometimes it does. And there are those avenues. So what do we do for the women who, like, how do we as citizens in this industry establish response, like an outlet for people to express when something is happening that's not right?
I think that we need to have a code of ethics and a code of professional conduct for the music industry, and it needs to apply to everyone. Not just agents or promoters. It needs to apply to artists, to managers, especially to managers. It needs to apply to music executives. It needs to apply to everyone. And this is something a group of us have been thinking about a lot, which is like, what can we do? In the legal industry, there was a process that you could follow. And, like, if somebody, and people acted up all the time, people were very inappropriate in the legal business. But having, mechanisms that you could rely upon helped keep people in line, because there was the threat and the possibility that they could be shamed. Like, we need to make it possible for women to speak out about what we experience as women in this business without it derailing our careers. It's fascinating to me that there's not been a Me Too movement in music. It's heartbreaking to me when female artists say to me, or female engineers say to me, I had this experience, this guy abused me, or, like, something happened. And I say to them, do you want me to go and talk to their manager? Like, what do you want? Like, what can I do? No, because it'll ruin, like, he's too big, he's too important of an artist, it will ruin everything. And so it's sort of like, you kind of have to, it's not respect, but, like, if people don't want to speak, or if they're afraid to speak, I think fear is so dangerous. Somebody dropped into the comments, like, we could also have more women in the C-suites, but we have to get there first. We have to get to the C-suites. We have to have more women who are chairmen, and there has to be a process for that. There's another element of it, which is not always about harassment and abuse, which is dangerous and pernicious. But I think sometimes men aren't as comfortable around women, and because they are afraid that they can't talk about the things that they want to talk about when the girls are around, or maybe because, there's just something that's kind of messed up and weird about American society, where men and women are really like strangely afraid of each other in some contexts. I don't know exactly what it is, but I remember early on when I was just getting started, and I was like the senior and the lead person actually, with a young rapper with whom I was working, and like the guys would go out all the time, and they would call me towards the end of the night, and they would say like, "Hey, we're all out," and I'm like, "Did you not want to give me a call before?" And they're like, "We're at a strip club." I'm like, "Then you should have called me." And I actually said to them, I'm like, "You should have called me because I would have showed up." And they're like, "Well, that would have made us uncomfortable." And then I said, "Well, then you shouldn't have gone to a strip club. Like you should have, like if you're going to be uncomfortable, like I might not have been uncomfortable. Like I would have just been like, I can't believe that I'm here. I would have 150,000% been saying in the back of my head, I can't believe that I'm here. But like, if it means like being there and getting to know the client and what he's interested in, like it's the same reason why, I played golf, when I was practicing law. It's the same reason why I became very fluent, in Scotch and in Scotch and whiskey. Now, I happen to really enjoy Scotch and whiskey and bourbon, and so that's a net benefit for me. But like it wasn't a natural instinctive thing. Like I did it because it was necessary for client development. Like and
I love that. I'm stealing that. I'm fluent in Scotch.
I'm fluent in Scotch. I'm my father raised us to be fluent in football and basketball, and like these are things that are actually really helpful. So
Yeah.
I feel like if men and women can think about the things that we have in common,
Right.
and like build from there, as opposed to be thinking about the things that we don't have in common, it turns out that there's a lot of stuff that we enjoy and that we can learn from each other. I just want to say one more.
Well, Binta, you just talked about the things you did in order to make other people more comfortable, right?
Right.
In order, like, and part of that is we got to get everybody to feel comfortable
Right.
with the experience, the different experiences that people bring. And to your point, like the more diverse point of view, the more diversity we have in point of views in the room, the more comfortable everybody's going to be, and the better we're all going to be, right? The better the music's going to be, the better the marketing plans, the better everything's going to be.
But that's the other thing is, let's focus people, like with all of my teams, every conversation starts with, are we all focused on the same end goal? Do we have the same mission and vision?
Right.
And when you start focusing and building your team around that, then some of the other stuff
falls away.
Does begin to fall away. Now, I'm going to be transparent and honest. I don't want men necessarily to enjoy all of the things that I enjoy as a woman. Because
okay, what do you mean by that?
Because I like having my space that is a female space, and where I don't have to worry about guys taking it over. So I don't mind, like developing fluency and literacy and things that men love to do. And I don't think men mind my developing that literacy either. But I do sometimes get annoyed. Like there's like some things that are, like I don't want to go, and I didn't ever want to get my nails done with my dad growing up. Like that was my private time. Like I didn't, like I told him to go to a men's salon if he ever felt like he wanted to do that. Like there are like other things that, like I want to have like my girl time with my girls where we are doing like our girl stuff. And I realize and I recognize that that's not necessarily fair, but those female bonds are really, really important. And they're important because they're important because it's nice to have a place and a space where you can most fully express yourself. And particularly because we are the oppressed and the discriminated group, right? So, like if you are, like dudes aren't, like dudes are all over everything all of the time. So they're already in every space.
I mean, that's super interesting, right? 7 sisters, like I went to Wellesley, Barnard, like, so I had a super interesting conversation I want to share with you with my eldest child, who's non-binary leaning female. And there was my alma mater was on the cover of the New York Times Magazine about, will there, in a world where there's gender fluidity, will there continue to be women's colleges?
They love that story.
Yeah, I went to my kid and I said, what do you think about this? And what was amazing is they said, why are there women's colleges? Right. And so we had that conversation. We had that conversation about gender disparity, blah, blah. And then I said, I think the right policy for women's colleges is that anyone who identifies as female should be accepted. But if someone is born female, identifies as male, then they shouldn't be at a women's college.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I think I was still on the board at Barnard when we adopted that policy.
Well, I've changed my thinking because I thought, well, that's not recognizing a trans male as male if you let them stay at a women's college.
Right.
And my kid, because they teach you, right? My kid said, well, but if your basis for believing there should be women's colleges is based on discrimination and gender inequality, I would say in today's world, a trans male faces much more inequality and discrimination than a cisgendered woman. So even if you tell them they have to leave the community because they're male, that is going to feel like they're being kicked out of the community because of their gender identity. And I was like, all right, I'm in. Like,
Yeah,
change my worldview. But it's super interesting in this world of what is your community, feeling safe in your community, how do you define it?
right.
You
Like
know?
what are the, I saw that Tom dropped boundaries in the chat. I think of it as, what are my zones of privacy?
Mhm.
I don't like boundaries so much because to me boundaries is like establishing a wall, and I want to be able to be embraced and to embrace others and to show people who I am. But I want to have my privacy respected at the same time. Like I want there to be a place where that's private to that person, and that's part of your dignity and your humanity, is that you have places and spaces that are private and that don't need to be public,
Right.
and I think about it in that way because to me the boundaries conversation started really developing and growing a lot with social media.
Right.
And for me with social media, it's less about the boundary and it's more about what is private, what should be private, what needs to be private, and what isn't private, what shouldn't be private.
Right.
I've come a long way in terms of my thinking, because once upon a time when we first got going with Facebook, I was like, oh no. The whole idea of privacy is like, it's a fiction. It's not even really, don't hate me. It's not even really in the Constitution. Like, there's no constitutional right to privacy. I'm sorry, I'm not saying that Roe versus Wade should be overturned. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I am saying that there is no constitutional right to privacy. And now I'm like, you know what? Maybe there's not a constitutional right of privacy, but maybe there should be.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's the whole notion of privacy in today's world is very different the way I experience it than from the way my kids experience it. Right. It's definitely changing. Well, and speaking of change in community, I want to talk, like, you and I met through advocacy. And one of the things I'm most excited about right now is the advocacy community, right? And MAC, which is the Music Artists Coalition, and BMAC, which is the Black Music Action Committee.
Black Music Action Coalition.
Coalition. I wasn't sure. Coalition. SONA, Songwriters of North America, the Recording Academy, like all of these. And we're all working so well together. Like the group of people that came around in terms of making sure the music industry was not left out of COVID relief, right? It was all of those groups, plus the RIAA, plus the NMPA. Like, it's really beautiful to see all of these advocacy groups coming together, and you're clearly drawn to advocacy. And it sounds like you attribute that to your upbringing.
I attribute it to my upbringing. I attribute it to my faith, and my family's faith and our faith tradition.
Mm-hmm.
I attribute it to need, and a sense of, like how I was educated. I went to a very, very good, it wasn't a private school, but it functioned like one.
Mm-hmm.
I went to a very, very good private school, public school in suburban Washington. And I I also grew up, I grew up outside of DC during a time where Republicans and Democrats both moved their families to the Washington area. So a lot of my classmates in middle school and high school were the sons and daughters of either elected officials, appointed officials,
That's why you
or
understand.
military brass. I'm sorry?
That's why you understand the Beltway so well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm literally a Beltway kid,
Yeah.
and so I was, but I was surrounded by all of these people who are in public service, and one of my earliest memories actually was Congressman Frank Wolf in Virginia saying to us when we were in fifth grade, we were on Capitol Hill, and this was a very different era. Like it wasn't nearly like polarization. If we thought things were polarized then, like it was like flower child days, like kumbaya, like everybody loved it, like there was no Republican restaurants or Democrat restaurants, like places where you would like feel like Republican churches and Democrat churches. Like now, like the Catholic churches in the Washington area are divided around like, oh, that's where the conservatives go. Oh, that's where that's where Biden goes. Like that's where the liberal Catholics, like the fake Catholics go. I'm a fake Catholic, by the way, according to some of those people. And so, like the idea of advocacy and speaking up for, and so Congressman Frank Wolf, like what he said to us is, if you see something that's wrong, you have to do something about it. And that's what my parents taught us. And, like that we fight. And, like I grew up as a civil rights kid, like I grew up with like not experiencing the movement, but benefiting from all of the progress of what I now call the first civil rights movement. Like I benefited from all of those advances. And I grew up in a white neighborhood. It wasn't the easiest thing, according to my parents, to buy in the white neighborhood, like the white affluent neighborhood I grew up in. But like I grew up, my parents got to buy a house, in an affluent white neighborhood in the 80s. And so like having benefited from all of that advance, like I've always just felt like it's necessary to continue to help others and to advocate for others. And when it comes to music advocacy in particular, to me, it's a human rights issue fundamentally. And what I mean by that is when you're somebody who creates, when you're a creator, then you should be able to own as much of what you've created as you possibly can. It's important that we advocate for the rights. And because when people have ownership of what they've created, they have dignity and they have value in their work, and it makes you feel better and it increases trust. And when we increase trust, we can create more. Now, I want to be very, very clear. I am not saying that you necessarily need to get, because I think some young folks today have taken it too far. And they take it too far in the sense of, I can get all the money and keep all the rights. It doesn't work that way. Like if people are making investment in you or if they're lending you money, like you have to figure out a way to make sure that those people are respected too, because they earned that money, or the money they might have inherited the money. However, they got the money, like the money, they got the money. So like there does need to be some level and degree of give and take. It can't just be all one way. Like I want to keep all of my rights and I want to get the money and I don't want to give anything up at all. Like that's not a negotiation. That's actually it's like the reverse, So, but that's for me where it comes from. It comes from having seen my uncle, who was a great musician, who didn't own anything, and so like my cousins now. And their children don't have the benefit of the copyrights because they didn't get them. And there was racism, like deep racism involved in that. You mentioned before like the genres. And I love thinking about it in terms of the music of revolution, the music of love, the music of like the common shared human emotions we have, because genres in the United States were not born. They were born out of divisiveness, and divisiveness that is rooted in racism, like with the way radio separated everything on AM and FM. And then the way we did it, like within the labels for a very long time. I mean, that's where that pain of separation comes from, is that, like, even though this is generating so much more money. So like for me, the advocacy part is essential. Like we can't, I'm first and foremost a creative person. I am secondly a business person. I think business is inherently creative, and we can't build big, strong businesses with great fundamentals if we're not advocating for the humanity of the people who compose those businesses. You know, a corporate is of the body, you know, corporate is body, right? And so it can't be that business exists, it can't be that we as human beings exist to service business. We, business exists to serve the needs of human beings and of humanity. And so if every music executive isn't advocating, you know, for the rights and the humanity and the dignity, whether it's another music executive, you know, a Black executive or a female, you know, particularly, you know, I'm going to say particularly Black women executives, because we somehow, even though we have, you know, 2 chairmen now, you know, between Ethiopia and Sylvia, somehow it's still really strange to people. And it shouldn't be, because we're great executives. Sorry. But, you know,
The 2 sides of Binta.
I'm just saying. So, but I think part of what makes women, you know, Black or white, great executives, or whatever your background, Hispanic, etc., is that women have the ability to be very organized, very thoughtful, very, very prepared, and very, very creative, and very compassionate at the same time. I think that those are the things that are really special about us as women. And so, like, to me, like, the whole advocacy part is we have to remind one another that we are more than the dollars we make, and we are more than the bottom line. You know, we're human beings, and that human beings have very particular needs in our humanity, and that we have goodness in us, and that we should be trying to find ways to tap all of that potential, because when we tap all of that potential in the right way, our businesses are going to be much more effective. And when our businesses are more effective, they're going to do a better job at delivering net goods to society, which is going to service society and service humanity. And that's a lot of the reason why music and being in the music business, more than any other business, is so important to me, because it is a civil rights and it's a human rights issue to me, which is that we can build a better country, a better world this way.
It's my COVID puppy. And when you think about artist advocacy for the folks on this call, what do you think are the most, like, if you had to pick an issue or 2 or a few issues, concrete artist advocacy to focus on this year, what do you think they are?
I think, you know, what I really think, I'm not even sure if I can say it publicly, given my role, but I think that we really need to make contracts more transparent. And I'm not talking about specific deal points, like how much money people are getting, but I think that we need to be transparent in how contracts are structured, and the different forms of contracts and the different structures that are available. That to me is really essential. I think the other thing is education. You know, like helping people to really understand, you know, the nuts and bolts of this industry. The other thing that's really important to us, even though I'm not a music lawyer and have never practiced music law, to me, it's really important that we encourage people to never ever allow somebody to say, your attorney, your label executive, your manager, this is just the way it's done. We're creative. So, like, we can come up with new structures, you know, like, it doesn't have to be this way just because it's been done this way in the past. We should actually be asking ourselves, why has it been done this way? Right. And so where I'm going now is, you know, like, when it comes to things like royalties, like, it just needs to be fair. That, you know, like, it needs to be fair. Like, you know, like, I do think that there's a good argument for royalty reparations, you know, like, particularly for some of the legacy artists, you know, whose descendants have absolutely nothing today, even though the music they made was the most important music. So I would like to see reform in the way contracts are structured as well. You know, there are all of these different things, all of these different deductions that I'm like, why are those deductions, like, nobody's returning records anymore? Like, who cares? you know, like, come on, like, that's crazy, you know, like. So, like, I think that we really
except
need
in the vinyl business,
Well, true, fair. But, you know, but I think that we need to have, we can be more analytical about what's in our contracts. I think that artists' rights remain really essential, but the thing that's bugs me the most, and where I'm probably the most focused beyond the issues you and I are both really focused on, in terms of like how we can make it more fair. The thing that's really bothering me more than anything else is that is platform capitalism. And what I mean by that is that, you know, the streaming platforms generate more and more and more and more revenue when more and more artists are releasing through streaming platforms. And the more artists release through streaming platforms, the less artists are making. And it became really, really apparent to all of us over the course of last year. I mean, we knew already that, to me, like, recorded music is its own vertical. It's not advertising for live. You know, like, it shouldn't be thought of as advertising for live. Like, we need to figure out how to structure the recorded music part of our business so that we can generate revenue that way. And it doesn't make sense to me that people keep saying, well, you know, all of the streamers have to structure their businesses the way they're structured, because if they don't, they're going to go out of business. If we were to make, you know, if we like consistently the best music and an aid in discovery, you know, like, we can't, right now there's so much more supply than there could ever be demand. With 80,000 songs being released a day across the streaming platforms, no group of people could ever listen to that much music. And when your supply and your demand curve are so out of whack, it's no wonder. I mean, this is the thing that I'm like, why aren't more people thinking about this and talking about this? The supply and the demand curve are so out of whack that the price is really, really low. And so what we need to do is to figure out, how can we bring supply and demand into a better equilibrium so that we have a better price, and that it's a price where, you know, it enables people to earn enough money where they can, at one level, invest in themselves, not be, you know, like, to me, one of the goals is, I don't want to be a burden to society, and I want to make sure the people who are working with me are not a burden to society or a burden to their families, you know, like, that they have self-sufficiency. And so earn enough so that you can take care of your needs, that you can invest in yourself, that you can invest in your business, that you can invest in your community, and that you can invest in society. Whatever investment looks like, whether it's philanthropic or whether it's actual business investment. And so, I think that we need to start having an honest conversation, because it's just so out of whack. That's the thing that I've been thinking about the most, but all of the other issues are equally important, you know, like, particularly when it comes to, you know, like, to radio, you know, and making sure that that performers in the United States are treated equitably with songwriters at radio. And that, to me, is it's not just an economics issue in terms of what the radio lobby is saying. To me, it's also a social justice issue, because when you look historically, a lot of the songwriters were white, and a lot of the performers were not. And so the performers at radio were not getting the benefit of that. Another issue that relates very closely to that, from my perspective, is, and this is weird to me, because when I was growing up, Black folks were all over top 40. I didn't even think that top 40 was a bad thing. Now Black folks are not in top 40, right? But top 40 is where a lot of the money is made at radio. And so, like, when you don't have songwriters, you know, or I'm sorry, when you don't have performers who are being compensated and who can't get into, like, the different, you know, platforms, you know, like, without going through a whole bunch of different hurdles in order to get there, that white artists don't have to go through, like, then it furthers that inequity. So radio justice, artist rights, getting our contracts straight, thinking about royalties and how that works, having more fluid structures, more modern structures that, you know, like, that flow with where we're at today. And then figuring out, you know, like, the demand, supply, price equilibrium at the platforms. We got a lot of stuff to do.
I know you're taking on the world, but there's no better woman to do it.
I'm not taking on the world. We're doing this together. You know, you and I are on so many committees together. We have these conversations all of the time.
I know.
You know? And Dina Leopolda is going to solve all of these issues, not me.
She is. We'll cheer her on and we'll support her. I know we're running out of time. Those are those are some huge macro issues. One thing I just want to, Tom said, be self-serving. One thing you and I have talked about, Binta, that for the audience that we have, I just want to say, songwriter splits, confirm your splits. Don't release your music without your splits confirmed. You are the ones who are going to lose money. And it's a much more granular micro issue, but I think it's also incredibly important.
But, and this goes to this idea of, like if we started having various standards in the business, because there's some stuff that we should never be spending our time talking, like it's a waste of time, because we could be creating and making stuff and then figuring out the best way to market it, right? So like we need to have standards for the way, it should be a science. We need to have standards for the way splits are taken care of. Because when we do that, it takes away the ambiguity, and it also increases trust, because people can just say, they can come into a situation and they can know this is, and like coming out of hip hop and saying this is a crazy thing, because
right.
We could have 10 producers on a track, which drives me nuts.
Right.
But we need to make sure that people are getting that they're agreeing to it before. Like what I say to high school age students when I have the opportunity to speak to them, and even college students, is make sure that you get the business taken care of so that we can have fun.
Right. Yeah. And look, I mean, part of this, as you and I have talked about, is incentive, right? And we have to take responsibility for the artists that we work with, but because too often the incentive is not aligned, right?
Right.
Since the labels aren't responsible for mechanical royalties in a streaming environment,
right,
they're not making sure the splits are taken care of. Too often the artist representatives have everybody yelling at them like, get it out. But like we all as a community have to say, the songwriter who, the songwriter who deserves to be paid, right, is losing out because we're not taking care of business. And I really think it was that moment because when I worked at the labels, we would not release music unless we had all the mechanical licenses. And that shift, when responsibility went from the labels to the DSPs, changed a lot. And
yeah, I mean, like just technology and the ability, I mean, talk about being self-serving. I would like us, we're over, or we're done? Oh, sorry, everybody.
Tom, I'm not even paying attention. You're just letting us talk. Like,
I'm being self-serving because we're still talking. But like what, I think that one of the things we got to do is, I don't know, I guess we're over. We should be over, but.
Well, no, tell us and close us out, Binta.
What were you saying when I got distracted by the time, by us being over time?
I was just saying we've got to, as a community, take responsibility, right, and aligning the incentive, right, because there are a lot of reasons to get music out really quickly, and then the only people who really suffer are the songwriters.
Right, and I think that we need to, like there's so many different issues that we think about every day, which is, like how do we, create opportunities for new and emerging artists, who can't get access to capital at all, these days, and also don't have adequate opportunities for exposure because of what's happened with COVID, because everything has become very top heavy.
Right.
Like how do we create opportunities for these emerging artists? Like how do we have the ability to develop artists successfully without worrying about how we're going to, keep the lights on, or like stay in our homes and stay in safe environments while we're creating. But like I think that we need to start having an honest conversation about professional and amateur musicians who, in this environment, are competing against one another for space and for attention, and what that means. And figure out like how do we create, like a pipeline from being an amateur to becoming professional, or, like make it clear that this is somebody who just chooses and wishes to be, like, they just love making music, but it's not what they're trying to do, so that we can make sure that we're taking care of our professional community, and nurturing our professional community in the way that we need to nurture and take care of our professional community. I mean, that's one of the other things for me that I really think about quite a lot, because I don't want to discourage anybody from releasing things, but it's sort of like one of the senators or one of the experts were saying about Robin Hood, which is that now everybody can become a trader. And with, Robinhood, the app,
Yeah.
that had everybody
Gotcha.
going crazy on GameStop. Like now everybody can become a trader. And while that's not necessarily the worst thing, like we need to make sure that people understand and have education around what it means to do that. It's the same thing in the music space. Now everybody can be, like this isn't true for film and for television because it's a lot harder to put together a film or a television project than it is to put together a song. Like now everybody can upload music. And so how do we make sure that the rules of the road when it comes to things like splits and, like whether it's publishing or royalty or like what to pay people or studio etiquette, like the old school producers and executive producers, like the way they used to organize their studio sessions is very, very different from how folks today are organizing their studio sessions because there's no lore any longer. People are making it up as they go along. And so finding ways to, now that things have gotten to be so big, finding ways to really center people around how do we take care of ourselves, like you were saying, as a community. Music is for the common good, right? It is, the last thing I'll say, and I know we got to go do our lives, is that it is the most powerful form of human expression and communication. And it has the ability to bring us all together. It has the ability to separate us.
Yeah.
We should be using it, my view, is to bring us together and to build a better, more productive society, even for those people who choose not to be musicians and artists and, like the people who just want to be fans. Like we should be using it to build a more inclusive, more loving, and more hopeful environment. Because when we do that, not only do we feel good as human beings, but everything is just better. Like everything is better when it's done with love and when it's done with heart. So that, for me, like that's what my great hope is for our business, is that we can stop getting so caught up in market share and, like, don't get me wrong, I'm very competitive and everybody knows that I am. Like everybody, like every other manager knows, like, that I'm gonna ask for what my clients need. I'm gonna ask for what my clients need. But I also try to bring, like some values to it, which is like, how can we make sure that we're creating value together? Like I don't want to just strip you of all of the value. And, I'm not trying to solve short-term problems. I'm trying to focus on the long term and how we can all create value together so that we can keep doing this, so we can keep bringing love and light and goodness and thoughtfulness and confidence and grit, like to our society and our world. Like there's nothing like what we get to do. It's the greatest blessing in the world to work in music.
Agreed. Tom,
Amen.
I feel like that's the closing note. I feel like, don't you?
That's a perfect mic drop. Let me, on behalf of the audience, simply just say, my God, you guys are so inspiring, and I'm so pleased with today. You did exactly what I hoped you would, and that is you revealed so much about you two as people beyond just being badass music executives. You're incredibly inspiring human beings, and we've all benefited from learning more about you both today, so thank you. To the audience, thank you for your time and attention. I know you got a whole bunch of filling in your heart and heads today. I hope you can internalize some of this and incorporate it into your own careers and own lives. I want everyone to be nice to each other. I want everyone to continue to wear a mask and get a shot as soon as you can. And come back here soon. We'll be here next Tuesday with another kick-ass session. Trust me.
Tom, you don't want to dispense your medical wisdom on how to prepare for the second shot.
No, I won't. We'll leave that between us.
I thought it was good advice. I thought it was really good advice.
All right, I was told by a competent medical professional who is an MD that wine and Tylenol helps, and water. That's it. All right, folks.
It might not help your kidneys, though.
Hey, I'm cutting this thing off right now. You all take care. Keep being awesome. I love both of you ladies.
It's amazing.
Bye.
Thank you.
This was super fun.